Amen. All right, so I want to start tonight with some good news, right? So this should come as a shock to most of us that on Tuesday night we're going to talk about some good news. But a couple of things hit the headlines here in this last couple of weeks. One of these things hit the headlines just over the weekend into the early week here. A Christian Broadcasting Network is reporting that Iran's Jesus Revolution, mosques close as 1 million Muslims accept Christ. So this is a really interesting thing. If you just kind of follow a few missionaries or organizations, right kinds of Christian websites, Voice of Martyrs and some others, there have been rumors of these kinds of things. And then this particular article is recent, guessing that as many as 1 million Muslims are coming to faith in Jesus Christ in Iran, 1 million Persians. According to Nettleton, who is the vice president of messaging at Voice of the Martyrs, the faith option many are choosing is Jesus, with at least 1 million Muslims reported leaving Islam for Christianity. So how is the regime reacting to this, what they reported? Now get this, this is fascinating to me. 50,000 of the country's 75,000 mosques have closed. Now, if that's even close to true, 2/3 of mosques in Iran have closed because they don't have enough people to fill them. Now, isn't that something? That is absolutely awesome. So there's good news, and it's interesting, right? The other excerpt I give you there just kind of mentions some of the polling and some of the data. People in Iran have grown sick and tired of the Muslim rule there in Iran, and so they're supporting democracy. They're leaving Islam. According to the report and Voice of the Martyrs, it's kind of an interview sort of with the spokesperson for Voice of the Martyrs. They do a lot of this kind of work. That's amongst the Muslim community in Iran, increasingly, it's less and less of a big deal for someone to leave the family religion and become a Christian. And that's always been a big deal, right? That if you're in a staunchly Muslim culture and you leave the faith and become a Christian, all sorts of crazy things and awful things can happen to you and to those that you join with, right? Iran continues to crack down on as many house churches as they can, but people continue to become Christians in Iran. And isn't that great? So people in Iran becoming Christian, and the UK is quickly trying to become as Muslim as it possibly can. The West is a mess, but God is not just defined by what happens in Paris and London and Washington, D.C., right? God is at work in powerful ways. And then this showed up over the weekend, too. Some football players at Ohio State University had an open-air worship service on the quad over the weekend. According to one report, approximately about 2,000 students showed up. Several dozen gave their lives to Christ that night, and it was just kind of a student-led thing. A lot of churches in the area supported it. This particular report of it mentions a handful of the testimonies. A lot of the students, the football players got up and sort of gave their testimonies, and I think there were maybe 4 of them quoted inside of this particular report. I gave you one here. And they all sound like this. They sound really sharp. They sound like individuals who have genuinely come to an understanding what their faith is like. The world didn't give me this joy. The world can't take it away. I had this new feeling in my heart that the Holy Spirit implanted in me, he said. And so since then, it was really a radical change for me. I started walking more obediently with God. I started seeking him day after day. He's worked on me, and I've had his grace, this grace of people in my life to get to this point. Just kind of testimony after testimony like this. And so this is really cool. Now, something like this happens, and it's a great thing. And then people, some folks get excited, and they start talking about, hey, a revival is getting started in Ohio State University. And I tell you what, may it be. May it absolutely be, right? And we should pray for stuff like this to happen. And when you study revivals, and a few years ago, we did an entire series on renewal. We used the Old Testament prophet Haggai to talk about renewal, and we talked about a lot of historical examples of genuine biblical revival and what happened. And things that are genuinely revival sometimes happen on very large scales. Even small nation will be changed because of what happened with this revival in the 1800s, 1700s, the 1940s, and in what is now North Korea, places like this. Oftentimes, what we would call revival or renewal also happens in these kind of microcosms. So a community, and where Ohio State is, I mean, it's a gigantic university, and it's in a larger population as well. God can genuinely send revival, and tens of thousands of people in that area could genuinely be changed. And we can call that revival, and we can absolutely rejoice in it, right? So we think of revival sweeping the nation, and may it be. But understand that when we see reports like this, we can genuinely put that label on it if God continues this kind of work. And this is what God is doing there, right? So this is cool stuff, to watch these kinds of things happen, and to watch students step up and do this, and churches in the area support stuff like that. So I want to start with the good news, so we could get to the normal news, right? I wanted to talk about this because this theme keeps showing up in different ways. And then I ran across this particular headline that sort of gathered a lot of this subtext together. There is a subtext to the Kamala Walls campaign, where either through their campaign or those who are around their campaign started talking about Kamala as the mamala, as the mom of the United States of America. They're trying to portray Tim Walz as the dad of America. There's several interviews and sycophantic articles about Grandpop Joe. They're building this image of family, and some of the interviews, especially that Kamala does, because she has gone on some daytime shows and so forth. It's not just sappy to watch these gals who host these daytime shows tell Kamala that this nation needs a mother, and you need to become the mother of the United States of America. But it's not just sappy. On a certain level, it's very disturbing and sickening that these individuals are asking someone else to become a kind of mother figure to them. There's a lot going on there. And that you've got a campaign that is actively, apparently, encouraging the sense that we as a party and the two of us as potential presidential, vice presidential candidates can become your family. Friends, this is directly out of the Marxist playbook that we've been talking about for weeks and months now. We've quoted these things out of their textbooks. The desire to break down the family enough so that they can have access to your kids, so that they can have access to your finances, so that you can retrain your children generation after generation. So this is straight out of that leftist Marxist handbook, right? One sort of egregious example of that, this again showed up, I believe, over the weekend, August 24th. Military parents lose custody of 16-year-old autistic son after refusing to let him transition to a girl. Son is currently in foster care, living with non-gendered chaplain named Lavender. So the story behind this is that this autistic son has had some difficulties. He self-harmed himself to the point where the parents were worried that he was actually trying to commit suicide. So they took him to the ER. What the hospital did is, while the child was in ER, they spoke with him privately and then informed the parents that their son wanted to become a girl, that his pronouns were now she, her, and that if the parents were not ready to go through the procedure that the hospital was ready to offer, that they might actually lose their son. And his parents have not seen him or been in contact with him since. The chaplain at that hospital is this non-gendered individual who goes by the name of Lavender, who's become the temporary foster parent for this 16-year-old autistic boy. The father has sold his business so that he can pay for the legal fees to get his son back. They do not know if their son's been given any hormones, any medical treatment, or any surgeries. They literally don't know what's happening with him. But notice something else. They did notice this, however, that after he was in the care of the chaplain Lavender Kelly regularly posted on social media about transitioning children without their parents' consent. So this is what Lavender likes to do. It is unclear if the teen has been given cross-sex hormones or undergone a transition surgery. The military parents who are in their 40s sent a lawsuit that their son has been seen posing in a sexually suggestive manner in photos posted to social media since he was put into foster care with Lavender Kelly. The teen's father detailed how he had to sell a successful business in order to pay for legal fees after his son was taken away from him. So this is not for the good of the son. This is for the good of a pedophile by the name of Lavender Kelly. That's what this is about. I don't recall. No, the hospital and then the authorities around that hospital took custody of the kid. Yes. If you follow these things enough, you see the headlines show up over and over again. Trans activists arrested by the FBI for child porn in their house. So you find this stuff constantly. It's the same story over and over and over again. So you've got yourself a pedophilic groomer and who has successfully gotten a hold of somebody's kid, at least for now. And even if they get their 16-year-old son back, has medical damage been done? Psychological damage clearly has been done. He's being groomed, but has medical damage been done? What is that going to take, right? So they want the kids. They want the kids. And Tim Waltz is the gift that keeps on giving if you do not like Tim Waltz. They keep uncovering things about him. I remember this being an issue in the state of Minnesota a while ago. I lost track of it. But sure enough, it was signed into law. It goes into effect in 2025. Now, the headline is a bit of a grabber, okay? Under Tim Waltz, Minnesota banned Christians from teaching in public school. What that means is, these are the first few paragraphs of this particular news story. Tim Waltz, while he was governor, went through all of this. What they had done is they revised the requirements for receiving your teaching license in the state of Minnesota. So if you teach in a private school that requires a license, or public schools obviously require the state license, anywhere where you are required to receive a state license to teach in Minnesota, you now have to affirm sex and gender, gendered identity, sexual orientation, physical developmental and emotional ability, socioeconomic class, and religious beliefs are historically and socially contextualized, affirmed, and incorporated into a learning environments where students are empowered. So what the new guidelines in Minnesota say, if you want to be licensed as a teacher, you have to not just affirm, but incorporate into your teaching values that are contrary to Christian, Jewish, and Muslim beliefs. So the headline is right. The headline's a grabber of a headline, but it's true if a Christian says, I simply can't sign on the dotted line anymore. I can't have this hanging over my shoulder. Now, this is going to include a lot of Christian organizations that have teachers who are licensed in their ranks. The story goes on to talk about, several schools have already decided, we're going to resist this, and other schools have said, we're going to keep doing business as usual until the state comes after us, then we're going to file a lawsuit. So things are going to kind of get a little bit crazy in the state of Minnesota when it comes to teachers' licenses and schools and education. But the left wants kids. They want children, right? So I want to read a couple of things out of this book. It came out last year. There's a documentary being made about this book, Beneath Sheep's Clothing. So let me describe this book just a little bit to you. First of all, a lot of this book, in fact, a large chunk of this book is very, very good. The author was a missionary in the Soviet Union. She did her advanced degrees on the history of communism in Central Europe in the Soviet Union, so she has kind of the literature, academic background, as well as firsthand experience. about what lived reality was like under communism in Central Europe and in the Soviet Union. So the vast majority of this book does a very good job of telling you this is what communists believe and this is what they do. And this is the effect that it had on especially churches and families. Now, the last couple of sections of her book, she diagnoses it correctly. She says, well, the problem is spiritual, really. That's what's going on here. The problem is spiritual. In case you watch the documentary or decide to read this book, just understand that her diagnosis for how to fix things is, well, here's the spiritual answer. It's pretty new agey. She doesn't talk about Christ. It's not really rooted in Scripture. It's kind of very fuzzy spiritually. So I was left a little bit wanting with her solution. She called herself a missionary. I believe she was a Mormon missionary at the time. So in any event, I have to say that in order to say the vast majority of the book is very good and very disturbing. The church, the two versions of churches that suffered the most in the Soviet Union were Baptist churches and Pentecostal churches. And the beatings that pastors received in the Soviet Union all the way into the 1980s are just gruesome to hear the tales that have been told. The documents and the photos that she produces in this book of how pastors were beaten within an inch of their life and had their tongues cut out. This is 1970s Russia, guys. This is not, 1472 medieval warfare. This is what happened. So she tells a lot of stories, but notice stuff like this. Out of all groups of people living in the Soviet Union in the latter half of the regime, there was nobody compelled to have a lower quality of life than that of Christians who engaged in illegal religious activity. They were banned from institutions of higher education and also found it difficult to find jobs, similar to convicted rapists in the U.S. Most of them had to take menial jobs that nobody else wanted. They were poor, more than the average Soviet citizen. They were unfashionable. They often had large families because they didn't get abortions. She goes into great length in the book about how much the Soviet Union pushed abortions, the only form of birth control available in the USSR. Their children were subject to constant mockery at school, and some were even taken from their parents to be raised in state-run atheist orphanages. These underground Christians were essentially the scum of the earth in Soviet society, lower than thieves or murderers, right? So a regime wants to become God. You have to get rid of people who believe in the one true God. You just have to squash them, right? We've told this story many different ways, and she tells actual story after story of these kinds of things. Breaking up families, taking kids, re-educating children, taking dads out of the house, making sure they can't get jobs and feed themselves, right? Doing everything we can to break the family. Sorry, Meg. There it is. It's not just the belief in God that vexes communists. Neo-Marxists, thought leaders, have long acknowledged that Judeo-Christian ethics and morals present a problem for communists as well, since they are a chief component of America's cultural hegemony. The way our culture exercises power or influence, a lot of it has to do with the Judeo-Christian background. Therefore, for communism to not only take root and flourish in America, such norms would need to be eroded and discredited and replaced with moral relativism, entitlements, weakened families, and fewer people marrying and having children, increased poverty, centralized power, and contempt for the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So she just lists the platform of leftism in American politics, right? We have to weaken families, we have to break them down, we have to change the educational structure, we have to do all of these things because all of that is about breaking down the ability of a mom and dad to pass along their moral values to their kids, and the ability of a church to do the same thing to the people who belong to that church, right? You have to break that structure, that fall of the dominoes, and you have to redirect it. So recognize, they really do want the kids. They really do want the kids, and it really is a spiritual problem. We continue to talk about and diagnose what they say, cultural issues, and how it reveals itself, how it shows up. But it really is a spiritual problem. And it turns out that many who fall for leftism really do have some version of family pain. We talked about this during a lot of the Antifa riots. Studies had been done in different groups of these young adults in Portland and Seattle and other major cities where these riots were significant. The vast majority of these kids at the time were runaways with no connection to their family, many of whom were not only on drugs but had no connection to their fathers as well. So you've got significant family breakdown, which means you've got this ready pool of young people looking for someone to tell them what to do and why to do it. And so they hit the streets, and this is what a lot of them decide to do. So increasingly, as far as the mission and the witness of the church in our culture goes, I think this helps give us a sense of what's important, why it's important. We continue to bear witness the ways that we have always borne witness, but to understand some other ways in which the church becomes significant to a culture like this. This makes the health of the Christian home and the local church all that more important. To celebrate a full home, to celebrate a family, to celebrate kids, to celebrate a healthy household and what it means for us to gather around each other and to encourage each other in our Christian community, in our families, becomes increasingly important, not just for us, but so that others might have a door into the blessing that God wants to give them, living life the way that God has created them to live it. Just the existence of the family, a healthy family, is something that's increasingly important, I think, for us. And Christian witness is now also about what is good for societies. That this is becoming increasingly significant to me personally. As I pay attention to these kinds of things are important to me. The apologetic, for lack of a better word, for the apologetic that if your culture is informed by Judeo-Christian values, if your culture is informed by the Bible, it will be far better than a culture that has rejected the Bible, or a culture that is informed by Sharia law, or a culture that's informed by the Hindu tradition. It's just going to be far better for everybody. If you say that you're interested in the welfare of the poor, well, I've got a document for you that's going to help you understand how this works on a social level, not just the things that we should want to do and desire to do and, give some money to do and some volunteer time, but a society structured around these values is going to be better for everybody than a society structured around other values. And the West is struggling with this. We're being told constantly that the society built on this is just white power, white supremacist, it's colonialist, it's awful, it's horrible, and we need to reject this because we've just killed a bunch of people because of it, and everybody else has better ideas. Nobody else has better ideas. Nobody else has better ideas, right? So this is going to become an important part of our existence in our culture, is showing the way toward the light. And realizing these things in scriptures that maybe we've never even really thought about that much before. But legal structure inside of the book of Deuteronomy, why is that important? Well, it might actually become incredibly important for us to understand and be able to articulate these things when society changes so radically, right? So is it good to live where an unaccountable organization, like even a hospital, can take your child, groom them, and mutilate them?